Should you study grammar when learning a new language? Hi, I'm Stefani. I am a language enthusiast and a polyglot, and I currently speak 8 languages, working on a couple more. I love language learning and I use this channel to share tips and tricks on how I do it. And if you're a returning viewer, welcome. I love to have you here. Now, to dive into today's topic on grammar, I would like to preface this by saying that I know that it is a very contentious topic in language learning. And I know that in schools, at least in Europe, a lot of what is being taught in language learning is grammar. I think that that is not a correct way to teach languages. Nothing against grammar. In fact, I'm a grammar lover. I'll go ahead and admit that, but I don't think that, just because we love something, we should be pushing it as a way forward. Or just because it's been done that way for ages, that we should be pushing it as a way forward, just like schools are doing it. So here's the problem that I have with grammar. Grammar is a lot about, us observing what is happening in a language and describing those patterns and distilling that information into rules and exceptions and conjugation tables and all of that. But does that really help you learn a language? To be honest, I do not think that it does. I think that there's only one type of person that should study grammar, and it's a weak should. It's not like a strong one. And that type of person is somebody that just has to know why something is said a certain way. I am that type of person. So I do study, well, study is a strong word because I never actively try to memorize any rules, but I do look up grammar because for me it is extremely important. It's important because that's how I keep my motivation in language learning. It's important because I can't let it go. When I see something that is said in a different way than what I'm used to in that language, I need to know why. And that's just, I suppose, like a personality trait that you have to scratch that itch and you have to know why and you have to look it up. So if you're that type of person, no worries. I think that it's fine if you go into grammar. I'm not saying never touch grammar. I'm just saying, unless you're curious about it, don't study it. So if you're like me and you're curious and you like it, go ahead and learn grammar. But I don't think, as much as I love grammar, I don't think that it is important, and I don't think that it is what makes me a good language learner. I think that above all, language learning is about input. And a lot of the rules are about internalization. And so grammar works for me, but for many others it is discouraging, boring. For many other people, it doesn't really help them. It stresses them out. And at the end of the day, if you memorize the rules really well, that's not going to help you speak better. So why we speak a language is because we have learned to express ourselves in a new way. Grammar is taking, at least grammar rules and that kind of rule-based learning, that is like taking language learning and turning it into another type of school subject. One that requires, a little bit more of like memorization of rules to use. So it is a little bit like knowing in history class when a certain battle took place. But language learning is very different than that. So you do not need to know what the subjunctive is. Or you don't need to know when to use the present perfect and when to use the present continuous. You don't need to actively know those rules and be able to recite them in order to be able to speak well. You can know that subconsciously by knowing what sounds good, by knowing how to express yourself in certain situations. And that comes from input-based learning, that comes from practice, that comes from internalizing the language as a skill, because language learning is a skill. It is not something that you learn as a set of rules. It is not something that you memorize, which is also why memory does not play a big role in language learning. It is something that is very much experience-based. It is about learning to do something in a new way. It is a lot like playing a musical instrument because you need a lot of practice to be able to do it well. And whether or not you know the inner workings of your piano doesn't matter when it comes to how good of a pianist you are. Of course, sometimes it can help, especially if you find yourself that you are curious about it. But most of the time, your skill and your ability is going to depend on your practice. And so with language learning, it is very similar. It's going to depend on how well you can speak. It's going to depend on how much you have practiced. And it's also going to depend on how much you have immersed yourself in the language. So it is, I believe, a bad idea to start with grammar because you have not had any contact with the language yet. Even if you like grammar like me, in the beginning, it is a good idea to just get some immersion, to get some input, to learn how things work in that language, to get a little bit of them, get your feet wet in a way. And then once you have done that, you're gonna start noticing some patterns. At that point, you know, those patterns, the more that you see them used in movies, in books, in like when you try to speak to people that are like native speakers or that have learned that language, then you're gonna start noticing these patterns more and more, and one day they're gonna become natural for you. They're gonna just come out easily. You're not gonna have to think about them. Whereas if you go ahead with grammar-based learning, and if you learn those rules before you've seen them in real-world examples, before you've seen them in books, in movies, etc., you're gonna have a harder time, because they're just gonna be a bunch of blabber to you. They're not gonna matter much, because you're not going to be able to know how to use them. So even if you memorize the entire conjugation table of a verb across all of its tenses, you cannot be going over that conjugation table in your head when you're speaking. Right now, I am not thinking at all about, you know, how I'm switching between tenses, or like how I'm using first person, second person, whatever. I'm not thinking about any of those things when I'm speaking, because it's a skill for me. It comes out naturally. Why does it come out naturally? Because I have had enough input, I have had enough practice. Have I had a lot of grammar study? Yes, because I studied English at school, and you know, you get a lot of grammar then. But did that help me? Well, it helped my curiosity, and that's it. It's not grammar that's gonna make you fluent. So what is the big takeaway here? For me, it's two things. One is, no matter whether you love or hate it, always start with something other than grammar. Always start with a little bit of, you know, phrases. Always try to get a language core. Then once there are some patterns that you notice, make sure that if your curiosity is high, and you need grammar because you need to satisfy that curiosity, you can look up grammar rules. There's nothing wrong with that. But do not think that that's what's going to make you fluent. You have to keep going through the rounds of practicing the language. Now, if you're the type of person who gets bored by grammar or gets discouraged by it, do not study it, because that's a very high price to pay, studying something that you don't like. In language learning, it never works, because language learning, a lot of it is about being open to the language, being receptive. That's the only way that you can internalize it. Language learning is really about learning to express yourself in a new way. It is unlike any other discipline. So it is very important to do things you like, especially because it can take a very long time sometimes. It depends on the language. You need to be able to sustain it. So grammar is something that you should not study if you don't like it, because you don't want to lose that motivation. You don't want to pay that high of a price. So there you have it. That's my 2 cents on grammar. If you have any specific questions on it, feel free to ask me in the comments below. I hope that this video was helpful. Like and subscribe if so that it can get to more people. And I will see you soon. Have a good one, and bye-bye.